Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our latest how-to webinar, and I'm delighted to say that we're joined by Gemma Birbeck today, well, I'll get Gemma to introduce herself in a minute, so I don't want to steal her thunder, but we're going to be talking all around PR and when and where to share your business news, and Gemma's going to give us a great run through of that and the benefits that we can get from it. So looking forward to this session. As usual, we record this session, so it'll be going later for anyone who wants to watch it on our YouTube channels. For the Northern Affinity partners, it'll be on the Mighty Networks platform, and also on the website as well. So it'll be various different places. If you are watching this recorded, if you've got any questions that you think of during, I'm sure Gemma will be delighted to answer them as we further down the line. And obviously for the people who are watching live now, for you guys, if you do have any questions or anything, any comments, please do, interact with us. You've got a couple of options on the webinar, whether it's the chat box or the Q&A options. So kind of enough for me, really. I'll hand it over to you, Gemma, to introduce yourself and kind of tell everyone what we're going to be talking about today.
Okay, thanks, Mike. I'm just going to share my screen before we begin. Feel free to say hello in the chat box if you are listening live.
Yeah, and if anyone's got anything just generally around PR, if you've got any kind of what your experience are, any comments, anything like that, please do put it in the chat box, and we'll try and cover as much of that as we can.
So this is a very basic session as to literally how to, where to, and when to share your business news. So we're not going to delve into all the strategic side of creating a PR program. We're literally going to give you the tips and advice to be able to do it yourself. So when something exciting happens within the business, how do you turn it into a press release? How do you send it out to the media? And why should you do it? So we'll be running through a few bonus tips as well. So we'll be talking about how you can maximize that once you do get the coverage. Session overview. We need to talk about, first of all, what makes a story. So there's so much involved with a strategic PR program, but this session is just about making a start on that. Where do you begin? A full PR program will usually include things like thought leadership pieces, market analysis. You look at how you can break into a new market. You might have reactive commentary involved in there, different types of features. This is all about just how to write a press release and where to send it. So we'll cover how to find the right contact, how to actually pitch to the media, and then maximize the exposure as well. So a little bit of an interesting statistic for you. According to Mag Forum, there's 8,000 titles published in Britain. Around 5,100 of these are B2B. So you trade or business magazines. For example, Business Matters, the Yorkshire Post, or it might be something more trade related, so such as the Grocer. But there's a lot of different kind of titles outside of that B2B as well. So you've got your consumer magazines. I'm sure you've seen very much like That's Life or Psychologies, those kind of magazines. We've got the custom publishing, so those that are provided by publishers independently, generally for their membership. So for example, I know the Chamber of Commerce often do one. We've got staff magazines. So sometimes what companies like to do is actually send out newsletters or create publications for their members of the team, just to kind of let them have an update of what's happening. They do sometimes accept guest submissions, especially if you've got an existing relationship with them. So it's always worth just building those connections as well, just in case there's an opportunity to share your news with them. But we'll delve into that later as to how you might make those contacts. Sometimes newspaper supplements. So classic example, Financial Times, Sunday Times often have the little inserts that you get inside of the newspapers. And there's always plenty of opportunities in there as well for the more feature-led kind of things. Again, completely different form of pitching, but it's always worth bearing in mind, there's tons and tons of courses or advice out there on the internet. If you did want to get into those, obviously, feel free to drop me a message on LinkedIn and we can discuss that during a session as well. You've again got your things like your academic journals, so they'll be for companies, it might be in the medical space or education, anyone that's done kind of a bit of research. So there's tons, thousands of opportunities. And what all this comes down to is understanding where your audience is, what they're reading, what kind of story that you've got, and is this going to be suitable for both your audience, the journalist, and the type of story that you've written. Bit of background into who me then. So who the hell am I? Why am I delivering this? What gives me the right to tell you how to do PR? Bit of background. I started my career, believe it or not, in finance and accounts. I was 18. I'd just finished school. I landed quite a good job in the finance and accounting sector, and loved it. I was 18, earning quite a lot of money, and I thought it was brilliant. I always found myself kind of deviating towards getting involved with some of the marketing stuff just naturally. Didn't have a degree in it, I wasn't educated. It was all kind of just, that's a really great idea. And I think, at the time people would say, it's a really creative idea, you're very creative. And these kind of things stuck with me over time. Unfortunately, I was made redundant when I was 21, and I just had my child, and I also found myself a single parent at that point. So I've really got an interest in kind of behaviours and how things influence the way that we acted and the choices we made in life, and decided to study psychology at university. And I think, looking back and doing that degree now, and when we look at how marketing PR is so focused around the customer and the emotions and the people reading the article, I think it was such a benefit for me to have done that. So I did that. I had a relapse of an eating disorder and struggled quite badly with that. And at that particular point, as we all do when we have challenging points in life, I decided that it was time for a bit of a directional change. I was still working in accounts post-university, but again, this natural talent and this natural interest in marketing PR just really kind of grabbed my attention. And I really wanted to make something of that. So I decided, a little bit like we're all sat here now, listening to webinars, listening to podcasts, reading all sorts of books, which I've got upstairs if anybody wants to borrow, doing online courses, becoming a member of the CIPR, getting some agency work, freelancing, doing some consulting, volunteering, got massively involved in the community, doing PR for other people, just to get that kind of that experience. And I guess the reason that I'm telling you this is because a lot of people have that fear of initially making that first move to send out their first press release. Is it going to be right? What are people going to say when I send it out? How do I even communicate it? And I guess my message is to you, looking back over my story, you can do it. Just go for it. We're going to talk through all the skill sets you'll need to make that initial first distribution. If you've got any concerns, feel free to drop me a message. But you can get there, and it is possible. And just to really demonstrate that, so over the last kind of 2.5 years, I've gone from being a freelancer to a consultant to a director of a business. We've got a team, we've got some fantastic clients. We've got 104% year-on-year growth this year. We're expanding the team, and a lot of our work, because like everybody sitting here, I don't really do my own PR, but a lot of our work comes from word of mouth recommendations and personal brand development. So, kind of doing this kind of thing, helping people out, and really just sharing our knowledge is what's kind of helped us grow. And that is a form of PR. So, if you do decide that sending that first release out might be a little bit too scary, start conversations with people, talk to them about your experience, because it is a form of PR in this modern day world. So a little bit about me. If anybody wants to tell me about themselves, feel free to use the chat, and it'd be really good to just hear, about yourselves, what your business, your story. So this is a question we often hear sometimes when we're having people conversations. So news. I don't really have any news, do I? And actually, when you think about it, the majority of us do have news. Now, I use this little checkpoint called just check your bits. Now, I know that sounds a bit funny, but I am from Yorkshire, so why not? But basically what that relates to is, so business changes. What's happening within your business at the moment? Have you restructured? Have you been acquired? Have you You know, have you moved office? Have you done a rebrand? That's newsworthy, and we'll understand why that's newsworthy as we move on later on. But just getting about those things changing within your business, making a list of those really helps you to identify what newsworthy events are happening in your business. Again, internal processes. So are you doing anything differently to other people? For example, have you introduced a new employee wellbeing strategy? Have you introduced a 4-day working week? Have you decided to be, you know, fully remote working and anyone can work from Spain or Japan or, you know, America, wherever they want to be? Is it something different that's changed within your business that might have a potential to become a story? Again, team update. So have you hired somebody new? Have you gone through the Kickstarter scheme? Has someone been promoted internally? You know, have you brought in a new financial director? All those kind of things that surround your team. Potentially, you know, maybe someone's had a really, really successful 6 months. They've demonstrated really good skills. They've done something really successful for the business. Potentially before, were they homeless? Did you help them out? Did you give them a career opportunity? All those kind of things make for really interesting stories. And then the success point. So this can relate to kind of anything that relates to your individual business. So the general kind of things that people tend to put out are profit increases, award wins. Have you won a new client? Have you got some amazing results for a particular client? Has somebody in your team been nominated for Forbes 30 under 30, or have they been recognised by an industry body for a certain campaign, for example, if we're relating it to our industry? And I've put a useful link here, which I'll get Mike to share afterwards, of just kind of an article which I found quite interesting of the 40 newsworthy reasons to write a press release. And it gives you loads of different scenarios. Again, you know, you'll understand your business better than anyone. So it's just about understanding what has changed and what can I do with that. So when we start taking it through to how we're going to turn this into a press release, as you'll see, we've got Mike there on the right hand side. Nice little lovely story that we did for Mike when we partnered up with him. So you'll have heard this probably quite a lot, especially if you're quite exposed to the kind of news and media and marketing PR industry. It's all about the hook. So you've identified what might potentially be newsworthy within the business. But what's the hook? How am I going to make this into a story that journalists will actually care about? Because they have to care. And the audience has to care because they have KPIs to hit. They're not going to share a news story that isn't going to impact their audience in some way. So a couple of questions to kind of think about. How does my news affect the community? So what difference is it going to make to the wider community? What's going on in the world right now that might make sense and might make my news even more important? And will journalists actually care about it? So I've used this example here of Mike because obviously Mike's done really well throughout the pandemic. You know, they've been really supporting businesses. And what's happened is they've decided to take that to the next step and increase their regional support. So that's newsworthy in itself, but it's quite a basic story in just the principle. So going through this process, we've looked at, okay, well, what's happening to businesses right now? They're struggling, you know, they're isolated, they're not connected with each other. So spinning that story around, the widened community will enable businesses across more northern regions to collaborate and develop new business. That's hitting some of those pain points of that target audience. You know, we've put that in there as well in the headline. You'll notice they're increasing the footprint. It's positive words. They're expanding, you know, they're growing, especially post-pandemic when a lot of businesses have struggled. It's a really positive news story to get out there. But what we've done in line with kind of Mike's mission and his values and everything that the Northern Affinity stands for is demonstrate how that's going to then impact the businesses, impact the economy. You know, why is he trying to do this? He wants to power up the North. So it's just about kind of identifying, you know, say, for example, if you've taken on a member of the team who's come through the Kickstarter scheme, and, you know, in itself, it could just be a story of so-and-so business hires a junior account executive, okay? brilliant, it might get picked up by some of the business media who run like the little supplements for appointments every week. But what more can we do with that? Let's tell the story of the person behind the Kickstarter scheme. What impact is it going to have on young people? Will it give them confidence? What impact is it going to have on the business itself? So what skill sets are they going to bring? And then how is it going to affect the wider community? So say, for example, if this was Mike and he brought in a new Kickstarter, what would that business then be able to provide to its members, to its partners, to the wider community, because that person is on the team? And it's so much more becomes about that story. You know, if you're feeling confident, you can even take it to the next level and throw in some stats in the release about, you know, how many young people are out of employment at the moment. What is the market like for hiring? You know, say, for example, if it was in marketing, I mean, I know, for example, at the moment, there's loads and loads of kind of roles out there at the moment, but there's also loads and loads of people searching for roles as well. So, you know, is it something really positive that someone's been able to secure a role like this when there's so much competition? So
Gemma,
just a couple of...
sorry, a quick question on that then. So how important is it to make it as, I guess, as personal and as possible, you know, make it about people and make it feel real to people, right? Because generally, probably most people are less interested about business, but more interested in people. Would that be fair to say? And their story and their background. It's a bit like the X Factor type thing, isn't it? It's always the background story and what's going. That's what the journey is, what people are interested in.
Well, there's generally two answers to that. So I guess the first one is that, you know, your business titles are primed to write about business success and business news. So they are very much looking for that kind of business focus. But also what they're not looking to do is just kind of have a free outlet for you to share what your business does and, you know, use it as an advertising platform. With any kind of story, you know, you're going to have more success when you do bring it back to that emotional side, when you get the reader to really recognize that something's different, that you've made an impact. And I would 100% always advise our clients, you know, exactly with the same idea for this story, is what impact are you going to have? Because you want your values to be demonstrated via a release. Because at the end of the day, when we think about what we're trying to do through PR, it's not to generally, you know, make sales. We're not trying to sell a product. We're trying to demonstrate that you're a credible business that cares, that you care about the people.
Yeah, and I
Does
think
that help?
Yeah, it does. And I mean, in the chat box, you may have seen Gemma. So Karen has put a point there. And obviously, I know a lot about what these guys are doing, but very long story short, the digital inclusion, accessible websites for all is kind of their main focus, and that's a great example of a story that people are interested in, because it is about business, but it's also about the people behind that.
Yeah, definitely. I'm actually aware of your story, Karen. You're obviously doing some very good PR, because I'm familiar with kind of, you know, how you're getting across. And I think that one of the things that I would say is, you know, the fact that you've brought Callum into the limelight as well and demonstrated what the story is behind the business and why you're trying to make a difference is one of the things that's probably going to make your PR program successful. I think the more people behind the business you can bring into the limelight, the better the story becomes. And it demonstrates, again, you know, going back to my original point, that it's not just about that sales. You generally want to show that something different is possible. I hope that answers your question. If you've got any more kind of points on that, feel free to just add some more things in there.
That's great, Gemma. And I've been looked at the people I can see who's on this call. There's a lot of people I know that have some really great stories. So I think that really help.
Good. So taking everything we've just talked about, this is one of the things that I quite like to do, especially when we get on board with people that are not quite familiar with PR and how that works, and especially through some of the coaching work we do, is going back to that old school focus of creating a mind map. So you've got your kind of newsworthy item that you've identified from the earlier task. How are we going to look at how we can make that into story before we even begin doing any research or writing it? Everything we've just talked about. Create this mind map, write down your mission, your vision, and your values. Look at the news agenda at the moment. So what are the press talking about? You know, whether it be the nationals or the regionals or the trade, you'll see common themes. And one really good thing at the moment as well is a hashtag on Twitter called journal request. So hashtag journal request. And you'll see common themes that journalists are asking for case studies in there. So it'll give you a bit of an understanding as to what their newsroom see as a priority and a hook at the moment, and quite a trending story. So it's always a really good one to consider. Again, key people. So who are the people behind the business, or who are the people that are involved in the project you might be talking about? Is it, for example, a celebrity that might have collaborated, or is it somebody within the business, again, talking about that Kickstarter scheme? Were they homeless before? Were they really struggling? Were they depressed? Were they just not able to get work anyway, and they've been given this opportunity? Again, community impact, a massive one. How is it going to make difference to the community? Because a lot of the regional media will especially want to see that. So how is it going to make a difference to their readership? For example, Yorkshire Post, you'll see a lot of the stuff that they do is very central around how it's impacting Yorkshire and the people in Yorkshire. And then target audience, always a good consideration. So as we move into looking at creating a media list, you'll see why that's kind of important, who we're going to be sending it out to, but you need to have an understanding of who's actually going to be reading this. Most people do care about the wider news agenda in general. That's quite a mouthful. However, there are some people that will literally just switch off if they don't get that interest straight away. And journalists and newspapers are under a lot of pressure to get those readership numbers up as well. So they have to bear in mind who their target audience is. So it's always just important to consider that when you are thinking about your news story. Is there a question that's just popped up?
I think there's a question, Gemma. That's fine.
Okay. So.
Yeah. So Helen just made a point that she's writing a book at the moment. It's all about her story and other people's, and trying to help others in the same position as well. So that's great.
That's excellent. That's good. When's it coming out, Helen?
October the 11th. So not long to go now. I'm sure we'll be around in no time. So something to look forward to.
Yeah, definitely. So before we I'll stay on the other slide actually. So before we kind of go into creating that media list and searching and doing your research on where to send it, I just want to give you an example of how I would create this story mind map in a recent example with a client that we won. So we recently won a quite a large flagship client with quite a long contract, which has personal value to me. And our mission and vision and values is that we care about relationships. So we're not just kind of we're going to offer you a service and we don't really get integrated within your business. We want to make a difference. We want to partner with people. We want to become part of their team and help them grow alongside them and make a difference. Now, this particular client, I'd actually had a relationship with, not a professional relationship, may I add, for about 3 or 4 years prior. He was one of the first journalists to give me his personal contact details when I was, doing all the kind of freelancing stuff before. And we were on text terms, and every now and again, we'd have a conversation and find out what he was up to. He'd find out what I was up to, and we just kept in contact. So that story, that client contract, has arisen from that relationship that we've built, which demonstrates our mission, our vision, our values. We want to help, we want to form relationships, we want to be a partner. When I think about the news agenda then, so I know for a fact, looking at the media landscape and the articles that are out there at the moment in our particular trade magazines, is talking about kind of, are businesses struggling or are they succeeding? What is the marketing what is the marketing industry like? What is the PR industry like? Are we going to see a big crash? So it is kind of a hot topic, what's going to happen as everyone goes back to face and things aren't as potentially digital as they used to be. Who are the key people? So this particular client is quite well known in our kind of industry because of the magazines that he publishes. So it's a really strong point to bring that in, because what that does is that signals credibility to other people. Because of course we have to consider that as well. As much as I said, it doesn't have to be about, sales, we have to demonstrate, it has to have a purpose. Why are we sending this news release out for our business and not just kind of the readership? So the community impact then, we're actually in a position now where we're hiring 2 additional people because of our growth. So it's really important to bring that in, that what this client has actually done by coming on board with us is enabled us to go out there and add another position. Target audience. So anybody reading the news release, I want them to bear in mind that we're quite a good firm to work with in terms of how we align our values, how we support, and how we might stand out. So just an example of kind of taking that mind map and what I do with a story to kind of fill all those different points that we've got on there. So the next stage, taking in mind that that example that we've just given. So a common mistake that people made is they would go straight into writing the press release after they'd done that mind map. Well, we do this differently. We've got a number of different tools, so it works slightly different for us, but I've written this from a perspective of that you don't have access to those database tools, or you don't have those existing contacts, and you are quite new to PR, which is obviously why you kind of sat on this webinar. So if, say, for example, I wasn't in the PR industry, but I fancied sending a news release out about this, where would I start with my research? So I might take what the news story is, put it into Google, look at the news section, and see who's written about similar stories like that before. So first point of call, what publications are actually interested in this kind of news? And then identify, is it industry specific? So you'll see Prolific North there, massive media, tech, PR, marketing, they're always sharing news stories like this. So I know from this, it's a really good publication. They've written there that this Blackburn agency wins a cutting edge brief. So yes, bang on, they've got to be a target. Again, be daily. So they've announced a client win. It is a business publication, but that suggests to me that they are interested in featuring that kind of news. Now, we also have to bear in mind, is it regional specific? So does your story relate to the actual region you're in or another region? We need to consider that, because you can't send a news release out to the Manchester Evening Post if it's based on Yorkshire. They just won't be interested unless it's got that Manchester hook. And we'll talk about how to maybe switch that over a little bit later on when we go into the writing. So what do we do? Will they affect the community? Again, it's an important consideration when we're thinking about this initial research stage, because if it's something massive, for example, let's say that you raised £1 million for homeless people and you got children involved from a local school. So that is more than just a regional story. Yes, you might be based in Yorkshire. The event might have taken place in Yorkshire, but the national media might be interested in that because it's so significant. It's something that affects the wider world and it's newsworthy. Again, what publications do our target audience read? So have a think about yourself in your industry, or those people that at this point. If you're in the business, you're running a business, you should have a good idea of who your target audience is. Think about what kind of stuff they read. So go on to Google, put those magazines in, have a read around, see what kind of stories they're sharing. How do they like to write them? Do they want loads of pictures? Do they want more text-led pieces? Do they want videos? You'll get a general feel for the kind of style of story that they put in there. And then again, another one to consider, bringing the business aspect into it. Where are some of your competitors featured? Because that signals that, it's achieving more than just a little bit of kind of sharing news. It's hitting one of those potential business goals that you want to bring more customers in by sharing PR. So if they've been featured in, say, for example, the business desk, and it's quite a similar story about a client win, send that news release to the business desk, pitch it to the journalist, and then again, you're going to be appearing in the same publication as your competitor is, which increases your exposure. So once we've done all that, it's a kind of a good idea to have this sheet open as you're doing all that research so that you can start making a list. But a really, really important part is kind of tracking where you're sending it to. As PR agencies, we have like a media monitoring tool, so we can track that through a database that brings it as a feed to us every day. But they're quite expensive. So from a perspective of doing it yourself, it's really good just to make a note of where you're going to be sending the news to. and track whether they've actually covered that story. So finding those contacts, how do you actually get to that once you've identified the publications? How do we go on then and find out who's the right person to contact? How can I get in touch with them, and what are they going to want to see? So I would suggest using Excel. Write down the publication on the left of all the ones you've just identified. Visit the contact page as a first point of call on any sort of outlet. Usually 9 times out of 10, the editors or the journalists are listed with a contact number there. So you'll be able to see that similar story you found, who was it written by? Click on their name or go to the contact page, look at what their address is, put it in there. And for future reference, make a note in a separate column, what do they write about? So the next time you won't have to do as much of this initial research, because you'll already understand that that journalist there would be interested in your story. Again, if it's not there, for example, is there a newsroom? So most publications do advertise their newsroom. Some of them have like a contact form on the website where you can just pitch your news release straight away. But it's very, very rare. More than likely we'll have like a news at, iPaper or news at B Daily or editor at B Daily, something like that. There's a generic email address that goes to all journalists. Again, if you do still want to find that more personal contact, go on Twitter. A lot of journalists put their emails in their bio. So find them on Twitter, find out what their handle is, and pull it from there. Another good place that a lot of journalists have, especially those that kind of write for the bigger publications, they'll generally have like a muckrack profile, and it will list kind of all their stories and how you can get in touch with them. And usually just by searching their name, that bio will come up, and you should be able to get a good understanding of them there. So we've built our media list. We know kind of what kind of the story is. We haven't started writing anything yet, but we've got a pretty good understanding of what we're going to say. But before we can do any of that, we need to have it structured correctly. So one of the biggest things with PR is having that existing template so that you can follow the same procedure. It's written in a way that a journalist wants. They've got as much information as they need, so they don't have to keep coming back to you, because they are really, really busy. They don't have the time to be in constant communication with, PRs or businesses. They have a lot of pressure on themselves as well. So we need to make their job as easy as possible. So one of the things we always do for clients when they first come on board is create them a boilerplate. And I'm sure a few people have kind of heard this before. And what that consists of is the type of article at the top. So obviously in this particular webinar, we're talking about just the standard press release, which is business news. But there are various other things that we might be able to send news out of. But for this particular case, just press release. You then want the date of when you're writing and sending the article. So that should always appear on kind of the left-hand side. And then if you're sending an image along, which I would always recommend if possible, a description of who's in the photo. So including their job title, left to right, who's featured. If, say, for example, a professional photographer has taken the photo, be courteous and reference that. Say it was done by X company at who's based in Shipley, or, whoever that might be, just to give that extra credibility to you as well, to demonstrate that you're open to promoting other people. The headline, always appear at the top, make it bigger so it stands out, because the headline, that's the really hard hitting, like what's happened. Again, ending the template with a written by and a contact number to get in touch. So sometimes they will come back to you because they'll want more information. They might just want to jump on the phone, ease of access. And then the notes to editor, this is really a good point because obviously in the press release, you can't put a lot of information about yourself. It's got to be about the story. So the notes to editor is where you can really tell what is the story of your business, what awards have you won, what are your social channels, what's your website, who are the founders, why was the business formed. Usually most people will have that kind of thing on their website. So if you want to take it from your website and put it in there, tweak it a little bit so it's a bit more kind of telling your story, then that's great. And it's just worth noting that the notes to editor aren't ever featured in the paper, and that's why it's important we put the ends. Although most journalists understand that now, that's just kind of a bit of a thing that stuck with me over time. It just gives them a bit of information to pick from if they want to add more to the release. So getting down to writing the actual press release then, how would we go about doing that? So we know for a fact that the headline needs to be bigger. It needs to stand out, and it needs to be something, it needs to be the hook of the story. I would suggest no longer than 7 words ideally, just because what that does is that allows you to keep it really short and snappy and get to the point. In the introduction paragraph, so what we really want to do here is demonstrate what the story is. And one of the things that we follow is the who, what, where, why, and when. So what's happened, why has it happened, where has it happened, and what difference is it going to make? So classic example of going back to Mike's, when we think about it, is expanded across the regions, the impact it's going to have on the community, and why is he doing it? We go into detail in later paragraphs, so your second and third paragraphs. How did it come about? What happened? Tell me more details about what's happening. So there, for example, we'd go into details of, well, he's grown into South Yorkshire, he's grown into Manchester, here's the reasons why, who else is involved. We then want to put a really good quote in there. So, founder, CEO, spokesperson, whoever it would be. We don't just want to use this section to say you're delighted with your growth. We really want to demonstrate your opinions, your mission, what are you trying to do and why is this so important to you? And it's a really good opportunity to really demonstrate what kind of a business you are and what you believe in, because legally journalists are not allowed to change any quotes that you send to them. They can change the rest of the press release if they want to, but they're not allowed to change that quote. So if you send that across and you really just, go to town on, here is why I created that business, or here is what it means to me, or why am I passionate about expanding, it's really going to get across what your values are and build those personal relationships with the audience reading it. After that, it's always really important to kind of include a bit of a company positioning statement. And this is where you kind of delve into a bit of consistency in branding. So always use the same positioning statement so that people are constantly reminded of that message and who you are and what you stand for and what your business is. It doesn't have to be long, just a couple of sentences. Then in your further paragraphs, put that story into context. So some of the stuff we were talking about earlier, can you bring statistics into it? What's been happening recently in the news? What's been happening to young people? Say, for example, if you've won an award, so what's happened? Has it been a challenging year? Have other people in the industry winning awards? Have they become more common? So really give it some context that's going to matter to the audience reading that press release. Again, you don't always have to do this, but we usually like to include a second quote from somebody else, either within the business or those relevant to the story. So again, using Mike's press release as an example, he had a great partner in Manchester and in Sheffield actually, who were able to provide an additional quote about why that was going to be important to those regions. And then call to action. So journalists don't always include links unless there's something that is relevant to include a link to. So if you have, for example, a big piece of data that you've done or a massive piece of content on your website that really gives further insight into how this is going to impact a certain community or a certain business, something like that, I would recommend linking it at this point. They generally don't just want to link to a website. There is no additional value for the reader by doing that. And obviously they've got the goal of keeping people on their website and going through to read other news as well. So that's a whole different area, kind of getting into digital PR realms, which is a completely separate matter. But it's always worth just considering, is there something which really adds value to this story that I could link to? So a couple of tips then, when you're writing that press release, write in third person. So don't write I or we, write about the company as if it's somebody you are writing about and it's not yourself. Don't make the paragraphs too long. Make it grammatically flawless. Keep it factual. Now that's really important. Don't just make assumptions. Don't kind of just theorize unless it's during the quotes. It's got to be factual because journalists have to write fact. They have laws and, regulations they have to adhere to as well. Keep your job titles in lowercase. That's how journalists like to write it. We've had some funny instances before, when kind of people have come back to us and said, oh, we just need to put director in capitals. And, at that point, that's kind of where we explain, we're writing in the house style of the journalist. Use your quotes to share your opinion and more info. and always include a relevant high quality photograph. So can you be creative with it? For example, if it's a charity event, do you have something where, you know, an accountant is dressed up as a teddy bear, something that you wouldn't expect that's going to really add value to that story and amplify the message? So when it's approved and it's ready to send, you know, it's really important at this stage that all those that are involved with the press release do approve it. So any quotes given to people, don't send it out without asking them. Make sure anyone in the business that might be in a senior position approves that press release and says, yes, I'm happy for that to go out to the media, because once it's out there, it's a lot more difficult to kind of manage that if something's wrong. So getting started with pitching, important points just to note on this one is don't attach the press release as a Word document or PDF. They just don't have the time to do that. It could result in the coverage not getting picked up. Copy and paste it into the body of an email, and attach your image, but make sure it's small. So, you know, don't add a massive file that it might crash the computer, especially when they're working from home. You know, people's internet might be unstable. Just always try and reduce the size if you can. And I think, like on most computers, they've got like a resize button that you can do if you do have a larger image. And another important thing, do not bulk send. So obviously we've all CC'd people in emails before. Don't do that to other journalists. You know, they want to feel that little bit of importance that you're actually interested in them covering your story. So make it personal to them. Just bear with me a second. I'm just bringing up my notes. Again, you know, don't over egg it. So don't say to them, oh my God, I've got a really amazing story and I think you'd really like this. You know, it has to be professional. They are people in a professional job at the moment as well. So when you are going out to pitch them, just keep that in mind. But also don't be robotic, be quite personalised as well. So going about starting with the pitch then, one of the most important things to actually get them to open the email in the first place, because they receive thousands every single day, you know, PRs, businesses, other people getting in touch with them. It's really important that yours stands out. So it's that subject line of your email that you really need to consider. And again, think about your headline. What's the hook of the story? What's newsworthy? What's going to make them open this? So for example, could you write £1 million raised by Children for Elderly Victim? Now, as a journalist, my eyes might tweak. I might think to myself, that's actually a really good story. I want to read more. I'm going to open that email and see what happens. At that point, there's your opportunity in just a couple of sentences to really sell this story. First of all, the most important point, personalise it. So get their name right. Say, good morning. You know, if it's Greg, for example, from the Yorkshire Post, good morning, Greg. Hi, Greg. If they've featured a news release before, thank them in the first instance. Say, thanks for sharing the recent news. Or you might say, I've seen that you've written XYZ recently. I thought this story might be of interest to you. And then go into the kind of the story overview and the key points. So you're making it about them. You've demonstrated that you're understanding what they write about and why they might be interested in this story. And then you're giving them just a couple of sentences, which might even sometimes be just the first line of the press release above the email, above the actual body of the text, that you can just copy and paste and put at the top, because you've written that release with the hook of the story, the who, the what, the where, the why, the when. And then if you've got any interesting statistics as to why else they should cover it, just put those in little bullet points as well, but keep it short. You can then sign the email off, and then the body of the press release should be underneath that as well. So all they can do then, literally, because they do like to copy and paste, you know, if it's really well written, they will lift it from the email, they will put it online, they'll take the image, and then, you know, bravo, that's your coverage live. So going back to our media list then, how do we track that exposure? So once we've sent it out, what happens to it? How do we know whether it's being covered? Again, you know, we use media monitoring services for that, so we can pick it up, but there are a number of things you can do. So setting up a Google alert, for example, for your company name. So whenever it's mentioned in the news, it'll feed through to your inbox, so you can keep a track on it if you're short of time. Otherwise, buy a paper. If you know you've sent it to the Yorkshire Post, get the app or go out to the shop and buy a paper that next day. From a business perspective, the Yorkshire Post run a business supplement on a Tuesday and a Thursday. So it's generally going to be on a Tuesday or Thursday if they're going to share that business news. They do often do like a back page feature on a Friday with business news, and sometimes feature like business profiles and things on a Saturday. So it kind of depends on the story that you've sent across. But generally it's the biggest supplements to do a Tuesday, Thursday. Again, go online, search those publications, give them 24 hours to kind of see whether they've uploaded that. A lot of them, if they're going to share the news, they will do so within the first couple of days. That being said, some of the weekly ones, see when they're running their publication. So it might be that it might not come out until next week. Some of the Manchester media, particularly, so like the Bolton News and a couple of kind of like the Rotherham Gazettes, they run the weeklies. But the journalists are quite good at kind of notifying you if it's going to be covered. So that's another way to track it. Again, did you receive the feedback by email? So if you did, even if it's a no, put it in your spreadsheet so you can improve for next time in your media list. Why did they feedback and say we don't want to cover that? Is it just the fact that it's not of interest to them? Okay, well, what did you do wrong? Where did you go wrong in your research? Is it just the fact that they're far too busy and they're not going to cover it for a couple of weeks? It's a note to remind yourself to follow up. So from a bonus tips point of view, when all this has happened, how can you continue that momentum? What can you do with it? What can you do with that news to really amplify your message and the success that you've achieved? So turn it into a blog. So make it again, bring it back to that first person and bring it back to a blog, writing about whatever it was. Or if it's a particular topic, can you turn it into something like unemployment rates in young people? If you've got a press room on your website, post the article on there as you wrote the press release. Tweak it obviously so that it's about it's about the company because it's on your website, but maximize that impact. If you send out newsletters, put it in your next newsletter so that all those people that might have missed it in the press or on wherever else you've shared it, put it in there so it goes direct to their inbox. Create some social media posts. So, for company social and your own. So talk about it on your own social media from a perspective of, you're delighted with the kind of the success or what impact it's going to have. How has it made you feel emotionally? Share the coverage and thank the journalist. And again, going back to that unemployment, can you create some nice graphics talking about how young people are being affected by the pandemic in terms of employment? What are you doing to change that? Offer tips and advice of what other people could do to change that. So talk about your experience. How did you actually go through that Kickstarter scheme? What advice would you give people that have never hired before? And it all just amplifies that wider message. You're talking about it and it brings everything. When we think about marketing strategy and PR strategy, it brings everything aligned so that it's not just that one standalone news release, it's a consistent message that you're putting out there. Any questions?
Thank you, Gemma. So we had a question earlier from Gary, just asked about hooks, actually, when you were mentioning that. Is there a danger of too many hooks in a press release? And is it best just to focus on maybe one or two?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, what you don't want to do is make it seem, I'm sure we've heard of like greenwashing from a sustainability point of view. You don't want to make it seem unauthentic. It has to be real and it has to align with your brand. So, for example, if I was to write a news release now saying, I just delivered a webinar because I want to help and support businesses, but then I went on talking about how, what else I'd been doing and what other people have been affected by, nobody else is doing anything and everybody needs to step up and there's loads of different factors in it. It just gets too messy and it dilutes that overall message. So I would just say, thinking back to how we structure that press release and that mind map, just bring in those points and try and consider every different part of that mind map so that you've really got a full understanding of what that hook is and what that message is that you want to get out there.
That's great. Thank you, Gemma. And one question I had was about, so how important is it for journalists when they're looking at what stories to run? They might look at the people, the businesses involved, and they want to look at their profile, whether it's on social media and have these people spoken on podcasts or done other things. Does that matter to them when they're deciding what to do?
Yes and no. Again, talking about those national news stories, if it's something big, if it's something like, like we talked about that £1 million raised for an elderly victim by children. You know, that doesn't kind of, it's a really interesting story. People would be interested in that. But if it was, say, for example, a business or talking about a founder and they didn't really have any exposure, the business didn't really exist digitally, they might be a bit more less inclined to kind of run with that unless it really had that kind of wow factor in the story, because they need to demonstrate that they're running with credible businesses as well. We always advise all of our clients to kind of really up their social and express their opinions, get their kind of, you know, company pages posted on social media so that there is that digital footprint, because believe it or not, they do the research, they, you know, due diligence, they look into things. Have they been featured negatively in the press before? Say, for example, if you said, you know, you're the only sustainable business in the UK, I mean, first of all, that's going to raise concerns, but they're going to want to look at your profile and see whether, you know, you were out driving a diesel car for 100 miles at the weekend with a picture of yourself with, you know, maybe, I don't know what you might be doing. You might be having a fire. You know, it demonstrates that actually you're not telling the truth, and they're just going to be a bit kind of, well, you know, I'm not going to run with that because I'm lying, kind of thing.
No, that makes sense. So yeah, if you can, obviously it helps, but it's not the be all and end all, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I would say 9 times out of 10 do it, because it, you know, they will look for that credibility, they will look for that existence and that digital footprint. But again, when we think about those bigger stories, that's where it doesn't really come into consideration as much.
Perfect, thank you. And Helen's asked a question, so saying if you're not successful, I assume when you submit an article, is it worth following up or trying again? And again, how long would you leave it? Obviously, maybe with a rewrite as well.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a couple of things that you can do. So sometimes it is a case of literally they've just not seen the email. They've been so busy that yours has just got lost. So maybe two or 3 days after, I would drop a follow up. Definitely don't do it after a couple of hours. They'll just get annoyed and you'll ruin that relationship. So I would always advise just drop them another email. They don't generally want you to call them these days. Things have changed so much. You know, if they do want you to call them, they'll usually have it on their profile on Twitter or somewhere. But just send another email saying, I wondered if this was of interest, or if you received it, and add further information. So give them something else to kind of capture their attention. If it still doesn't work, I would take that as a fact that, again, go back to that research. Did you send it to a publication that actually you weren't really sure was going to be picked up? Is there something else that you can rehook this news story to make it a bit more relevant to them? If not, okay, what can you do next time? Learn from it. Read back over your press release. Sometimes having that look after it, you know, a couple of days afterwards, you might spot things, errors that you've made, or maybe not generally structured it as well as you might have done. And again, you know, go online. There's loads of resources that out there that can just support you. Kind of, you know, things like this. There's various different downloads you can get. I'm happy to provide some good resources and links to things if anybody needs any, just to kind of give you that helping hand to make sure that you are doing it kind of professionally and right in the first place to maximise that coverage.
Brilliant. Thank you, Gemma. I appreciate we're coming to the end of the time now. So thank you so much. I mean, that's been fantastic. I'm sure a lot of people got a lot of benefit from it. If people do want to contact you and find out a little bit more, what's the best things to do? If
you want to aim higher with Loaded PR, please connect with myself on LinkedIn. So you'll see me. I'm kind of stood with a in the background, and I've got a little hiring logo on. So quite easy to find. There's not that many Gemma Birbecks. Feel free to pop me a message. You know, happy to jump on a half-hour session with anyone that just wants a bit of advice. Yeah, no problem.
That's great, Gemma. And obviously, for any reason, if anyone can't find Gemma, I'm sure you can just let me know, and we'll put you in contact. But you know, thank you for everyone for joining us and your questions and your comments. It's been great. And obviously, finally, Gemma, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you everyone for coming. It's great.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for having me.
Have a great day, everyone.
Bye.